Hello friends, Jenkins here, bringing you another Dota 2 video on behalf of Dota Alchemy, and in this video I'm going to be covering top 5 hardest counter picks in all of Dota, at least as things currently stand in the patch. And the way that I came up with this list, these 5 counter picks, is essentially I listed off all of the counter picks that I could think of and came up with ways to deal with certain counters, like for instance Weaver versus Bloodseeker. You can go for a Blade Mail, build a utility Weaver, and it's not that big of a deal. But these 5 counters are the ones that essentially there's nothing that you can do. So that's what this list is about, and without further ado, let's just get into it. Number 5, OD countering Timbersaw. The main reason that this counter is in the top 5 is mostly because of the interesting way in which Timbersaw likes to function in a game of Dota, at least in a game where he is actually useful. Basically, this hero's entire purpose is to be what pros refer to as a dead hero, which is essentially an incredibly tanky, unkillable frontliner that will just annihilate you if you focus him, but he's strong enough that he's forcing you to focus him because he's just playing in your face, and he has good spells and he has items. But in order to force you to focus a Timbersaw, Timbersaw needs to have a good early game. Timbersaw needs to have a good laning stage. And OD, because of the pure damage that comes from the Arcane Orb and the Insteel and the spamming of Astral Imprisonment, he can basically just completely obliterate a Timbersaw in the laning phase and get almost every single deny. But if you do end up beating the OD in the laning stage somehow, or you dodge the OD and lane the Timber somewhere else that's not against the Outworld Devourer, then OD doesn't care, because in the mid game, in the late game, if OD hits you enough, he'll steal enough int from you, and you're super tanky on Timbersaw, so he'll get a lot of int, that he will just one-hit you with Sanity's Eclipse, and then one-hit your entire team as well. So you're actually a liability if you're strong, or if you're weak. It doesn't really matter. So essentially, OD against Timber means that Timber can't frontline or snowball, and at that point, Timber is just a completely regular hero, which is a problem because his entire shtick is that he frontlines and snowballs. Number 4, Batrider countering Monkey King. Currently, there is very little about Batrider that Monkey King can effectively deal with in almost any way. Bat is great against Monkey's Jingu Mastery, because if you put a single stack of Napalm on the Monkey King, it's very hard to keep getting those stacks up, and if you do, you will take so much damage from the stacks of Napalm that Bat will essentially just kill you, even if you do proc your Jingu Mastery. But arguably the best thing about Batrider versus Monkey King is that Firefly gives you flying vision, which is going to let you see Monkey King if he's trying to jump around trees, but it also destroys trees. So it's almost impossible to play in the trees versus a bat without feeding, because you essentially just get stunned, the trees die, and you die. Even without lasso, Batrider will kill you. And one of the best things about Monkey King is the fact that he can play in the trees and get vision and jump over trees for ganks and so forth, and you basically just can't do that against Batrider, at least reliably. If that wasn't enough, Batrider is also one of the few heroes that can actually fight into Monkey King ult when it's already down, because you have 3 different ways of getting Monkey King out of his ult. You can flame break the ground and bounce him out of the ult. You can blink lasso and then force Monkey King out of the ult, which is an incredibly reliable method of getting him out of the ult and winning fights. And then you could put Firefly down in his ring and spam him with Napalm stacks, and then essentially he has to leave the ult on his own because the Firefly is going to be in the ring. So in other words, basically every one of Batrider's spells counters every one of Monkey King's spells to some degree, and therefore it's a very difficult matchup to play for Monkey King. Number 3, Nyx Assassin countering Outworld Devourer. Nyx Assassin is an innate problem for OD, because the more powerful OD gets via items or stacks of Arcane Orb, the more powerful Nyx gets, because mana burn, of course, scales with the target's intelligence. So OD may be able to 2-hit his opponents if he steals enough int, but then Nyx can just 2-hit him with mana burn very easily. But that's not the only problem for OD in this matchup. Nyx also hard counters Astral Imprisonment, which is usually one of the best saves and disables in Dota. If OD's Imprison is used on his teammate, then you just walk up to that Imprison, use Carapace, it stuns OD, and then you impale OD, mana burn him, he's at 50% HP and isolated, and you get him killed. It's very, very easy. If he uses it on himself, it's the exact same thing. You just Carapace as it's about to pop, and you stun the OD, kill the OD, and the OD can't blink or force away, which are two very common items for that hero. And worst of all, if you use the Astral Imprisonment on Nyx Assassin, for whatever reason, if you spam your Carapace on Nyx, it will actually Carapace the damage that came from the imprison that was on you. So if OD tries to imprison you to get away, you still stun him. Like, basically, no matter what, Nyx is reliably able to use this ability to disable and then kill OD on almost any point in the game. And at the point that OD has a BKB, Nyx will usually have an Ags due to the gold talent, and so his spells will be spammable enough that BKB is only going to be a decent solution for a couple of fights when it's got a high duration. Number 2, Ancient Apparition countering Huskar. This one is probably pretty obvious to most people, but it's only obvious because it's such a great counter that almost everybody knows about it. And the basic problem is that Huskar's entire shtick for so many years is that he picks up an armlet and then becomes unkillable because of the toggling, and because the lower HP he is, the more regen he has. This is great for AA because if you try to armlet toggle with AA Blast on you, he just kills you. It just instantly kills you. Even if you're not low enough HP to die to the toggle, Huskar's regen, and therefore almost his entire purpose, is nullified by just the blast as well. Unfortunately for Huskar, the AA Blast also is BKB piercing, at least the debuff is. Maybe not the damage, but the debuff is. So there really isn't anything that you can do to get your regen back on Huskar, or to allow you to armlet toggle. There's just nothing that you can do. I've seen people trying to go like no armlet or blink Huskar to try to blink and dodge the AA Blast to deal with this fact, but then you're playing a hero whose entire purpose is to snowball, and you're playing it as if it's a regular hero. It's very similar to the Timbersaw issue, and at that point, you can essentially consider a Huskar countered because you are building in a certain way that is abnormal because of a 5-role support that's forcing you to go for that. And that, in my books, is already good to pick AA in that scenario. Number 1, Meepo countering Anti-Mage. The problem for Anti-Mage is that Meepo does pure and physical damage, so Anti-Mage's magic resistance is good against other heroes, but not at all against Meepo. Meepo also has a spammable ground-targeted root, which means that not only can Anti-Mage not blink away from a Meepo, he can't reflect the spell because it's ground-targeted, and he can't Manta it off because you can just throw another net at point-blank range after he uses the Manta, and it's going to instantly root him as well. So essentially, at almost any point in the game, Meepo is going to be able to kill an Anti-Mage and shred him with just using the net. But the real problem is that the pacing of the game which Meepo plays is very bad for Anti-Mage. It's very problematic, I should say, because Anti-Mage's good timings, his crucial timings, are completely outpaced and outclassed by Meepo's timings. When Meepo gets a blink, Anti-Mage is still farming Battle Fury, and Anti-Mage will feed a Meepo. In the lane, Meepo's relatively weak, but so is Anti-Mage. When Anti-Mage gets a Manta, Meepo will already have a blink and probably be building into a sheep, have a level advantage, have a bunch of damage, so you can still kill the Anti-Mage. When Anti-Mage gets to the very late game and he has items like Butterfly, Heart, maybe BKB, then Meepo is going to have so many Ethereal Blades and Scotties and Sheep that AM's items simply don't matter. He's still going to die in a single disable. So what's the solution? There basically isn't one between these two heroes, and that's why I consider this to be the hardest counter in Dota. I always wince when I see in a competitive match one team picks Meepo, the other team has Anti-Mage, because it's usually that this Anti-Mage is like the entire win condition for one team, and then you pick Meepo, and at no point in the game will that Meepo be weaker than Anti-Mage. It is a complete trump pick. Basically, the only potential solution is to have a very, very good hard counter to Meepo, or two of them, on the Anti-Mage team, and then have them focus entirely on dealing with the Meepo, and then have Anti-Mage essentially play his own game. But even then, Meepo can still gank Anti-Mage around the map, and it's still a huge problem for that hero. So those are the 5 hardest counters in Dota as things currently stand, in my opinion. And speaking of my opinion, I would like to hear your opinion in the comments if there's a counter pick that you think is better than something that I listed in this video, but at the end here, I want to cover a couple of, well, more than a couple, but a few counter picks that I considered putting in the list, but I didn't, just because I think there are ways to play them that you're going to be perfectly fine, essentially. But Pugna countering Skye, I think it's not that big of a deal because Skye can still do effectively in the laning stage. Skye still has magic damage to kill Pugna, and sure, Pugna can one-hit Skye with the Nether Ward if Skye casts his ultimate, but it's a support hero on Skye, and you can get a Glimmer Cape, you can get Tranquil Boots, you can still deal with it. Anti-Mage countering Skywrath Mage, once again, very similar. It's like a support hero countered by Anti-Mage, and I think Skye can still do very well against bullying Anti-Mage, who's a very weak laner, and Skye's a very strong laner. I think AM countering Medusa is a big one that people might mention just because AM can just drain all of Medusa's mana, blow Medusa up with the Mana Void. However, Medusa has an early timing where she's strong and can push before Anti-Mage is strong. Bloodseeker countering Weaver, that's another big one that I know people think is a really good counter, but you can actually pick up a Blade Mail on Weaver or build into a utility like offlane or support style Weaver, and then Bloodseeker as a carry is not going to be effective in the game because you're countering a hero that doesn't really care if they're countered because they're either utility or you one-hit the Bloodseeker with the Blade Mail. Huskar countering Storm and Ember. This is a mid-matchup counter, and we've seen this in competitive time and time again, where Huskar will completely obliterate a Stormer and Ember. But the issue is this is a purely laning counter, and it is very good, but there's the concern of how does Huskar play this matchup when the side lanes just have the Stormer Ember in them instead of the mid lane? Like, then you have a side lane Huskar and it's not as good. Then you have a Stormer and Ember who can pull a camp. Like, there's a lot of options, essentially, when it comes to laning to deal with that hero. There's a bunch of them. I don't want to cover everything, but essentially, if you think there's a counter that I didn't mention in here, I'd love to have a discussion in the comments below. I will be checking those out, and thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it, and I hope to see you in another video.